You are listening to the So Now What podcast with Lana Manikowski, episode number 51. So now what? These three words raced through my mind time and time again during my journey through fertility treatments. I tried desperately to have a child, but never was able. I yearned for a community to join that could understand my struggles. I couldn't find one, so I created one with the So Now What podcast. I love that you found us. Thank you for joining back in to listen to another episode of the So Now What podcast. We are one episode away from 52. I have so much pride and excitement for how much I've grown and how much the podcast has grown. As of today, we are just over 8,500 downloads of the podcast, which just tells me that there is more work to be done, because at the rate the podcast is growing, it's apparent that there are women out there just searching to learn how to love their life if they couldn't become a mom. Which brings me to an episode that I've been thinking about quite a bit, mostly because it comes up quite often when I'm doing teaching and working with my students. And that is whether it's possible to be grieving something that you never had. So let's get started. On today's episode, we are going to talk about how to grieve when there's nothing really tangible that you're grieving about. And is that really possible? Is it a thing? And let me tell you with the loudest of loud, yes, it is a thing. You can grieve the thought and the dreams and the hopes that you had of becoming a mom. Because for many of us, it's something that we just thought was going to be in our future, something that we thought was going to be so easy for us to attain. We did everything we possibly could to reach our goal of motherhood, and it didn't happen. There is nothing left to do but to grieve, because we're basically saying goodbye to a vision that we had for our futures and a vision that we had for ourselves and the dreams that we had to raise a child and to grow a family and to send kids off to school and send them down the aisle to get married and then later become grandparents. That is a whole story that we created in our minds for so long, and we played in our minds since we were young girls. So if you find yourself wondering why you have this pit in your stomach and this sadness in your heart when you think about the lack of motherhood and the lack of children and the dreams that you dreamed of for so long not being available to you, that is what I call grief. And some people may tell you that you can't grieve something that doesn't exist, but in my teaching and in the way that I work in my coaching practice and with the students that I work with, we spend a lot of time having compassion for ourselves and navigating this grieving process. Let yourself feel as though you have lost something, because you have. You have lost a dream and a vision that you had for your future, and there is absolutely nobody who can tell me that I am not entitled to grieve, and I want you to know that you are entitled to do the same. When the average person thinks about grief, they typically think about sorrow that's associated with losing someone, but grief can follow many different types of losses. When I give you the example of losing something that you hoped for but never had, it's when you're finding out that your hopes and your dreams or expectations may not come true at all. Infertility or pregnancy loss or infant child loss is one of the greatest things that we have felt in our lives, and something that we didn't expect. And as human beings, we just dream. It's what we do. And for many of us, motherhood was the biggest dream we ever had. And it becomes so hard to navigate what you're feeling and how to overcome it and how to really put words around some of the things that we go through when we are mourning and grieving our ability to become moms. And oftentimes I've noticed that society does not have a way to deal with these type of losses. There's no funeral when you find out that you're infertile or that you've lost a child before it was born. And people don't typically acknowledge some of the things that you're going through because, let's be honest, we're not out there talking about it first. So when people don't hear us talking about it, they think that them recognizing it and gesturing it may trigger us. So people oftentimes feel very alone because there's a lot of shame and a lot of judgment for ourselves that we're wondering, what's wrong with us that we are actually grieving something that we never had. So I encourage grieving. I think it's such an important part of us getting through this healing process and this process of learning to love your life, even though you couldn't become a mom. And society just doesn't have established ways to grieve these kind of intangible losses, if you will. I'd like to offer you some opportunities to consider of ways that you can grieve this process or grieve this loss that you've had, because everyone's process is unique and it's best to discover what does and doesn't work for you. So first, I want to just offer you an opportunity to acknowledge what it is that you have lost. For many of us, it's not just the inability to have children. What we truly have lost is an understanding or an anticipation of what our future was going to look like. That we didn't have to be the ones responsible for plotting everything we wanted to do in our future, that we would just be able to create this beautiful family and then live our life through the milestones that our children were going through. First of all, just acknowledging that there is loss around that. And some of you might be able to do that alone, but many people need someone or need a trusted environment in order to work through that. So that is exactly why I am here, and I would love to be your trusted source. Another good opportunity might be joining the Thrive After Infertility Mastermind, where that's going to be a small group of women who would get you, but finding an opportunity to share your story with a trusted group or someone in your family that you can trust or someone that you can really talk to. Another option is to do paper thinking about that. If you're not sure what paper thinking is, go to stitchcoaching.com, download my guide to loving your life again, and I give you some awesome prompts that are so useful and so helpful to just get your brain moving and some of the thoughts and the beliefs that you have about yourself that are just kind of lingering around in your brain, doing paper thinking to get some of those thoughts out on paper. So do that this week about what it's like to grieve and why you are entitled to grieve and feel a sense of loss or to mourn this part of your life. So paper thinking is, you all know, if you're a listener of the podcast, you know I am such a paper thinking fan. And one of the most amazing and powerful tools that I can offer you is doing some work on your past self. So it's been a while since I've talked about past self, but for many of us, it's hard to move forward in creating a new life if we are still living in this past-focused life where we're always feeling like there's no out, that there is just always this like 80% cap. I mean, you hear me talk about that all the time. When you go through fertility treatments and find out that you can't be a mom, you just always feel like your life is at 80%. And oftentimes that's because we are living from a sense of our past self. So when you are able to do some work on your past self and complete the story of your past, not necessarily forgetting it or acting like it didn't happen, but just allowing yourself to grieve who you were at that point in your life and who you wanted to be, and allowing yourself to get really crystal clear that despite your life not turning out the way that you dreamed it would, it can still be a fabulous, fulfilling, and abundant life. And then finally, I want to always acknowledge that the grief will never go away. And I know that sounds disappointing to some of you, but the great news that I have for you is when you understand how to process your grief and work with someone who has been in your shoes and knows exactly what it feels like to wake up as you every day, you will start to understand that the grief is just something that kind of tags along with you. The more that you process it and process the future that awaits you and the future that seems exciting and fulfilling and so easy to wake up in every day, you'll see that the grief does not outweigh that future version of you. It just is kind of along for the ride, and every once in a while it'll pop its head and you'll say, "Oh, grief, there you are. I knew you were still here. I knew you were still with me. I knew you will always be a reminder of where I've been and how far I've come." My purpose today is just letting you know that feeling grief and feeling like you need to mourn this portion of your life is normal. Nothing to be ashamed of. You're not weird. You're not odd. You are just an infertile woman who's doing her best to create a life that she loves. So thank you for listening. I hope you join us next week as we celebrate the 1-year mark of the So Now What podcast. And I have to put in a quick reminder that if you're interested in joining the Thrive After Infertility Mastermind, the price is going up on September 1st. If you've thought at all about it, now is your time to register. It is going to be the most magnificent 3 months of your life because you are going to have so many tools that nobody talks about. And I feel so grateful to be the one to offer them to you because they are the exact tools that I have used to create this amazing life of mine, even though I couldn't become a mom. So go to stitchcoaching.com/thrive, register now, make a commitment to yourself that you will get to the point in your life that you are just beaming again and wanting to be so excited about your future because it is possible, ladies. And I know because I have done it. And I would not be here today if I did not do the work that I am ready to teach you so that you can do this same amazingness in your life too. So have an awesome week. And remember, it is never too late to discover your meaning. I'll talk to you next week.